Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on the second round of Promisezone designations for urban Promise Zones. I am Valerie Piper, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Economic Development at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I am speaking to you on behalf of a 12-agency federal team who has come together to really design the Promisezone initiative. So I may just sound like one person, but I'm not. A lot of folks that are paying attention to this and paying attention to the good work that's going on in communities all across the country. We have a long agenda today. I won't read through all the topics, but I will say that there are a couple of items I'm going to call out for further detail on October 7th. We're going to do webinars that are specifically focused on two web-based tools that are available to applicants this round. One is the mapping tool, which some applicants may remember from the first round. It allows you to draw boundaries around your proposed Promise Zone and get demographic information back. The other is listed here as max.gov. That is actually a survey tool that we're using to do the intake for applications. If you go to the website max.gov, you will not be able to find the Promise Zone application. You actually have to use the link that is on our web page for the application. So we'll come back to that later, but we also will be on October 7th doing a full webinar to show people how to use that. So I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of the Promisezone initiative itself, and then go through some sort of key components of the application. And then we did ask folks to submit questions ahead of time, so we have a number of really terrific questions that show us actually that people are spending a lot of time with this application already, and so I want to thank everyone who took the time to do that. We'll get started with the questions that folks submitted in advance, and we will then go on to any questions folks want to submit during the course of the webinar. So go ahead if you have questions and start submitting them while we're doing the presentation, and that way we can have them all queued up by the end of the initial part of the Q&A when we're addressing the ones that came in earlier. Okay, so here we go. As I mentioned, there are 12 federal agencies involved in the Promisezone initiative. We have a list of them here, and each of these agencies has identified programs that are particularly relevant for high concentrated poverty neighborhoods in urban areas, or the residents of high concentrated poverty neighborhoods. So many of these agencies have identified more than one program or initiative that they're working on that they feel is appropriate for Promise Zones, and that actual list of programs and initiatives and participating program offices continues to grow. There are 5 Promise Zone goals. This is at the sort of federal level. We are looking at creating jobs, increasing economic activity, improving educational outcomes, leveraging private investment, and reducing violent crime. Those are 5 big, broad buckets that are kind of how we are generally measuring, or articulating what we're trying to do here at the federal level. However, we recognize that communities get to these kinds of outcomes and goals in a host of different ways that respond to the unique circumstances of each community. So within these big, broad buckets, communities are defining how exactly they're focusing their efforts, what priority they're focusing and sequence they're focusing in, what's most important in that place, and where are your best opportunities to make change. And we are not dictating that at all. We are really building this initiative so that the federal system can be more responsive to the work that's going on at the local level rather than the other way around. We'll come back to how that's working in a minute, but as I say, we've kind of set out these big pools of goals, and then know that folks are defining much more detailed goals and strategies within them. The benefits of the Promisezone initiative are that designees and their partners receive preferences in like accessing existing federal resources. So we're not making any new grants directly with the Promisezone designation, but a community that's designated as a Promisezone will have the opportunity to apply for competitive grants from all of the participating programs and receive some sort of preference within that competition, because we will have made a judgment as a group of agencies that that community has kind of a collaborative structure and a strategy and the capacities lined up behind its strategy that, sort of all things being equal, will make our federal investment go farther. That's really kind of how that designation operates in the context of a competitive program. We're also sometimes able to make preferential access to technical assistance or demonstration programs or other kinds of things that agencies are doing available to Promisezone communities. So this is something that really varies from program to program in terms of the structure of how priority access or preference points, or however it is manifested in that program, will be. Depends on the appropriations and the authorizing language and the way that the agency does business. But across the programs that are participating, Promisezones get some special consideration. We are also placing federal liaisons from HUD for the urban Promisezones in each Promisezone community. So there's an actual federal position that's going to be created to work with the local stakeholders and help to match your local needs and gaps with the federal programs that can support your work. So this is a sort of very kind of proactive structure to try to meet the communities where they are, and help accelerate their work through really direct application of the right federal tools. We also have a commitment from the Corporation for National and Community Service that AmeriCorps Vista members will be available to work with local partners to build capacity in the Promisezones. Many people on this webinar are probably familiar with the AmeriCorps Vista program. It's a venerable program in our federal work, and it has been absolutely terrific already in the existing designated zones. The corporation has made 5 Vista slots available for each designated Promisezone, and what this means is that the local organizations that are collaborating to meet those Promisezone goals and carry out the strategy are able to identify AmeriCorps Vista members either through the corporation's national recruiting and matching service or locally for a scope of work that they write and the sponsoring organization puts together in collaboration with the corporation. And then the Vista member is paid by a stipend from the corporation, which also covers their health benefits and childcare and some other things, so that they can come and work with that organization in an appropriate role, working on the conditions of concentrated poverty or with help build the capacity of those organizations to keep doing that work. So it's a terrific opportunity for communities to take advantage of that program. We have proposed tax incentives for businesses to hire Promisezone residents and also to make capital investments in the zones if they're enacted by Congress. So there are 2 bills. Some of the folks on the line I know have already looked at these proposed bills in Congress. One has been introduced by Senator Casey, another by Congressman Peters in the House. So there's a live conversation about this. The tax incentives are drawn from the empowerment zone tax incentives and sort of what we're seeing to be the sort of most successful of those. As we say, sort of reward businesses for hiring zone residents. A little bit more of an incentive if the job itself is located within the zone than if it's not, but hiring a zone resident is still worth something to that business. And again, the capital investments in the zones are a direct opportunity to draw private capital into these areas. This is a list of the Promisezone opportunities in FY 2014. As you can see, a number of different programs are participating in a whole host of different ways. Some of these are technical assistance programs, others are competitive grant programs, still others are tax incentive programs, and all of them in one way or another include a Promisezone preference. So what we have done to help folks understand what each program is offering at this point and how the Promisezone benefits are structured is that we've put up on the Promisezone Initiative website a really helpful set of boiled down resources from each of the participating agencies. So if you go to that website at www.hud.gov/Promisezones, you'll find a link to the federal partner resources, and you can view it either by agency, or there's actually a spreadsheet that you can download that lines up the programs by agency and also sorts them by the sort of primary and secondary policy areas that they relate to most directly. And so if you're looking for things about asset building for individuals and households, you can go down the list and find the things that most closely relate to that, whichever agency they're in. And then there's a link that provides information on that agency and its involvement with Promisezones, and then also the specific programs and what those Promisezone benefits are. Basic descriptions about who's eligible to apply, funding amounts, application deadlines to the extent that's applicable now, a little bit of background, and then links to the relevant agencies' direct information about that program. So we've tried to sort of digest this level of information so that it's a little easier for folks to navigate and see the kinds of things that are being offered for Promisezones. And I should say that we expect to see this list change from year to year, at least annually. Appropriations change, policies change, programs get reauthorized, new programs get authorized, and so there are substantial changes that sometimes occur in the programs that are available for the Promisezone benefits. And so at least once a year, we're going to be updating this list. And we hope that over a 10-year period, which is the term of the designation, that Promisezones are going to have an opportunity to access the right combination of resources that will help them move their local strategy along. Getting into this second round application process, the lead applicant eligibility for urban Promisezones. Lead applicants are the organization that are going to be the lead organization if the Promisezone is designated. This is the organization that's kind of in charge of keeping the entire collaboration going, making sure that everything is running smoothly. We actually have a definition of the lead organization in the application guide on pages 20 and 21. There are a lot of really helpful definitions, but lead applicants, again, going to be the lead organization if the Promisezone is selected, can be units of general local government, which can include offices or departments within local government or a county government in partnership with the local municipality. They can also be nonprofit organizations under Section 501c3 of the Federal Code, or I'm sorry, under Section 501c of the Federal Code. Public housing agencies, local education agencies, metropolitan planning organizations, and community colleges. We've called out a few kinds of applicants here because we were getting questions from those kinds of applicants, and because there were things going on with the agencies that sort of highlighted that for us. But there are a lot of other kinds of organizations that can fit into these definitions as well. So we're starting to get questions from a lot of other kinds of organizations, many of which are nonprofits. And so if you have a question about your type of organization and whether you could be a lead organization, an eligible lead organization for Promise Zones, you should write us an email at promisezones@hud.gov, and we will answer that question. The qualifying criteria for the geographic area that is proposed as a Promise Zone is as follows. Promise Zones must encompass one or more census tracts or portions of census tracts that are across a contiguous geography. So they have to, all touch each other. The rate of overall poverty or extremely low income rate, whichever is greater, of the residents within the Promise Zone must be at or above 33%. The extremely low income rate, if folks aren't familiar with that, is a measure we use at HUD that takes into account cost of living in the region, and the sort of area median income. So it's a little bit more income in relation to the income levels and cost of living in the rest of the region than it is fixed poverty rate, but we'll take whichever one is higher. Promise Zone boundaries must encompass a population of at least 10,000 people, but no more than 200,000 residents. And local leadership, including the mayors or the chief executives of all of the UGLUGs as unit of general local government, represented in the Promise Zone, have to demonstrate a commitment to the Promise Zone effort. There are some changes between the first and the second round of the Promise Zone initiative that are real important. For one thing, the qualifying criteria no longer require that the boundaries of a current Promise Neighborhoods, Choice Neighborhoods, or Burn Criminal Justice Innovation grant, implementation grant in each of those cases, be present. So that was a first round requirement only. The reason that we did that was we wanted to, we're still kind of designing this initiative and making sure that we have focused on all the right types of programs and incentives and things that would be most helpful for communities that are pursuing community revitalization strategies. And we figured that the folks who had been participating in kind of the last major generation of neighborhood revitalization grants were the best positioned to tell us what we were still missing. So we have some brave guinea pigs who've been doing just that and giving us a whole lot of feedback over the last year. So we hope that the initiative that is available for all qualifying communities to apply for this year is actually a better rounded initiative with a lot more helpful set of structures behind it. So, I'm sure we're still going to be refining it with lots of input from all of you, but folks, any qualifying community can apply. Any community that meets our qualifying criteria can apply without a prior grant this year. All applications are going to be submitted electronically this time, not through email with attached documents, but through this service we have at max.gov. Again, you cannot find the application for Promise Zones if you go to the website that's listed on this slide. It is accessible, however, through the link that is on the website that is listed at the bottom of the slide, www.hud.gov/Promise Zones. So go to that web page, you'll see a link to the MAX survey, and that takes you directly to where you need to be to start taking a look at the application. The other thing that we will come back to in a little bit is that there is an opportunity to set up an account by submitting a non-binding letter of intent to apply, and what that does is it sets up your application account. So we're encouraging people to try that out, sooner rather than later. Final big difference between the first and second round is that only one Promise Zone application may be submitted in association with a unit of general local government. In other words, if your mayor is supporting one application and that is going to be the application we consider this round. There are some, pretty significant reasons for that. I mean, one of the big policy reason for this is that we consider support of the local government to be extremely important to the success of this initiative. And we are therefore unable to really tell if more than one application comes in from the same place, the same city, whether there's a greater commitment to one application or another, or which one is really going to have that backing to be successful over a 10-year period. And so we are asking folks to make some hard decisions up front. Now, that being said, we will have a third round, and additional applications can be accepted from the same unit of general local government in a future round. But there, as I say, we are asking for folks to make some hard decisions up front and really focus, because that's one of the major success factors for an initiative of this type. More changes. We have established 2 urban subcategories because we wanted to recognize, we got a number of comments that to the effect that smaller cities and metro areas just have a narrower base of resources available to them than much larger metros. And we felt like the criteria that we had written for selection spoke to kind of meeting communities where they are. So the community defines its needs and opportunities, and then defines a strategy to take advantage of those things and address the needs, and then talks about capacities. So it's a good set of criteria for different situations, but we do recognize that the kinds of commitments and partners that are available in smaller and medium-sized places are different often than the kinds of resources and partners that can be available in the larger metro areas. So we have created a small to medium metro subcategory that's for places with a metro definition of less than 500,000 people. And then the larger metro CBSA category relates to those metros with more than 500,000 or more people. So we're hopeful that number one makes clear that the small and medium metros are in fact eligible and desired. We'd like to have folks apply from smaller metros, and that we recognize you have a little bit of a different situation in those kinds of places. Eligible lead applicants include, again, we talked about the sort of local education agencies, metro planning organizations, other kinds of specific types of organizations that have been called out. County governments, public housing authorities also eligible. We occasionally get questions about workforce innovation boards, all of these types of universities. Again, if folks are nonprofits, they're all available. If you have all eligible. If you have a question about your specific organization, send us details and we will answer your question. And then we have moved the minimum required poverty rate or extremely low income rate. It must be at or above 33%, and last year it was at or above 20%, with one census tract that needed to be above 30 because those applicants had already competed on the basis of need. So again, we have definitions for all of this stuff available on pages 20 and 21 of the urban application guide. So folks should spend a little bit of time with us with those definitions, and then if you still have questions, email us at promisezones@hud.gov. This is this max.gov website. It's a screenshot, and that's the first page you see when you click on the link that says Max Survey from the www.hud.gov/Promisezones webpage. So you'll see this. And again, what we're asking folks to do is to go ahead and fill out a very brief form, or like 5 to 7 questions or something like that in this form. And it's a non-binding letter of intent to apply that is submitted electronically. And then what that will do by submitting that is it'll create your account in the Max survey so that you can start to upload your application and move back and forth through the questions and put together your application. So we're encouraging folks to do that by October 17th. From a program management standpoint, that gives us an indication of how many people may be interested in applying, which is helpful to us. It also, on the applicant end, makes sure that it all works from your perspective and that you are in the system. You have your own individualized link. I think they call it tokenized in the trade. But you've got your own survey account set up at that point, and you are able to work on your application. If you have some trouble with that, you want to know before the morning of November 21st on that deadline date. So it's better to get in there now and start to recognize any issues. This is the mapping tool, or the first screen for the mapping tool. Again, there's a link at www.hud.gov/Promisezones. And we will have webinars coming up that are specifically focused on both the max.gov application survey form and using that, and the Promisezone mapping tool and using that. So on October 7th, both of those are coming up, and we encourage folks to spend some time with us there because, again, we think they're fairly easy to use tools, but you don't want to get tripped up. And we find that we can clear up a lot of frustrating issues and let you get onto substance if folks participate in the webinars. Basically, the mapping tool allows you to draw a boundary around the proposed promise zone. You can actually zoom in and see streets and draw it those boundary lines wherever they make sense to you. Then it crunches a bunch of data in the background, and it spits out the need indicators that will, number one, tell you whether your zone is an eligible area under our criteria for poverty and ELI rate. And it also spits out other data that is used in the needs section. So you actually get a PDF form back for your zone. And again, you get in and set up an account, and you can draw different boundaries so that you can start to design the area that makes the most sense in your community. Application materials, we have a bit of a checklist here. I'm not going to read absolutely everything, but there's this sheet is also up on the www.hud.gov/Promisezones webpage, and it'll sort of walk you through what our suggested page limits are. It'll show you where things count toward the 25-page limit for narrative versus the 35-page additional documentation page limits. Again, we'll come back to some of this during the max.gov demonstration so you can see how it all lays out in electronic form. But we've been able to put character limits into the electronic survey form, so that'll help make sure that you don't get over your character limits for some things where we have hard character limits. Others, things that count toward the 25-page narrative, we let you define how much emphasis you put on what, but we do have some suggested guidelines just to help keep people focused as they go through that. So I mentioned the PDF under the qualifying criteria. A couple of things under the eligibility. There's an abstract which just kind of gives us some vital statistics on your applicant organization and who all's in your consortium. There's an executive summary with a 2,000 character limit that describes your promise zone plan. Both of these are on max.gov. For the qualifying criteria, you will get the PDF from the mapping tool, which is what you submit to demonstrate your qualifying, your eligibility under those qualifying criteria for poverty and population. And then we will need a letter demonstrating commitment from the leadership of the local government. So letters count toward there's a 35-page limit for additional documents after the narrative. And the letters do count toward that. So, we occasionally get the question, do I need, my mayor to submit one letter for the eligibility section and another letter for Other commitments, we encourage you to put those things in one letter. Further down, we'll talk about the MOU. If you can get more commitments in the MOU, don't repeat them in the letter. A signed document's a signed document. So you don't need to be duplicative and then run out of room for other things. Section 3 is the criteria for need. This is over and above the threshold poverty or ELI rate. We are asking for a short narrative, talking about a little bit of context around your poverty, employment, vacancy rates, and crime data points within your Promisezone. That'll give us, particularly we find on crime, but also some of the other indicators, it gives us a better sense of, what's really going on in your Promisezone and, sort of the state of conditions at the time of application, or as best we can tell given the census cycles. The needs and assets assessment, starting in the strategy criteria, excuse me, is a locally defined discussion of what your major needs and opportunities and assets are in your place. So this is where you really can give us a sense of what you are individually dealing with as a community. We do benefit from maps, so we've required one of those. It's optional for rural, tribal, but in urban areas it's really important for us to see that. A Promisezone plan is the second part. We need an overarching narrative of the Promisezone plan, give us, sort of the big context and, what the major points are about how you're going to address your needs and use your assets and opportunities to do that. And then there's a goals and activities template this year within max.gov, and we're asking folks to go into this survey form and give us, as this will sort of walk folks through a really substantive opportunity to describe what's going on in each of the goals that you're setting up for your Promisezone. You can identify up to 6 goals, each of which include up to 3 sub-goals, and it doesn't count towards your 25-page limit. So the advice here is, save the narrative for the stuff that connects the goals and is really big picture strategic in nature, and that you really want to call out as, the key ways that you're going to get your goals accomplished. And then we're going to get a good deal of, pretty detailed substance through the way you fill out that template. And it'll be easier for us to review if it's broken down that way. It'll also hopefully be easier for you to write. And I think it'll be quite helpful. I should also say that there is a checkbox at the beginning of those goals templates that you can use to indicate whether, you have to check it to indicate whether you would allow us to share your information about that goal with the public. We've actually received a number of inquiries from philanthropy, from social investors, from non-federal partners of various sorts who are just interested in what's happening in different communities and where there's a comprehensive strategy that's focused on particular types of projects. And by checking that box, you'll allow us to share your information with that broader group of interested parties. And what we're hoping to do, I think if we just were getting this information ourselves as a group of 12 federal agencies, we intend to use the information to help us target technical assistance and start to, really think about how we're allocating our energy. If we see a particular type of project or a particular issue that keeps coming up in a lot of the applications, that'll be an indication to us for our own future program development. What we've discovered is that non-federal partners are thinking in that same way and would be interested in what you all submit. So we're hoping that folks will allow us to use that information publicly. You will have that choice, and we're happy to answer more questions about that if you're interested. There is, in the application guide, kind of a document mock-up of how that template looks and some descriptive information about the kinds of information that go in each segment. So I'd suggest people look at that before they start filling stuff out. Sustainability and financial feasibility, obviously a really important issue for an initiative that is not providing direct grant funds. And we know this is a tough thing to pull off locally without an additional grant, but we want to know a little bit more about how you plan to sustain the kind of cross-sector, multi-agency collaborations that are successful in long-term neighborhood revitalization. So capacity and local commitment is a very heavy component of the Promisezone scoring, and we break it down into a number of parts. The bottom line is we want to see applications that are focused in high concentrated poverty areas, have a really sound strategy that's well targeted and well thought through for addressing those needs, and then is lining up the capacities at every level to carry out the strategy that you've put forward. So there's a set of questions about the partnership structure, how well thought through that is, how you're governing your work. Governing is a little bit of a big word, but how much communication is there really? What is the mechanism for understanding whether all the different pieces are still on track and coordinated, and if something seems to be faltering, to address that situation. Who's doing what? Are you clear about who's doing what? It's hard to execute if you're not clear about all the roles. So, we're looking at, what that structure is and how strong it seems to us in terms of being able to carry all this stuff out and keep it organized. The capacity of the lead applicant to do that job. Again, the definitions of the lead organization, implementing partners, and supportive partners are in the application guide on starting page 20. And this is a really complicated, set of juggling to do, and so we like to understand the level of experience that the lead applicant is bringing to those kinds of jobs. Lots of different technical expertise required. It's really a management job across multiple sectors and multiple disciplines. Capacity of each implementing partner organization. Implementing partners are the ones who are carrying out the day-to-day activities, producing things, delivering services, doing different things that are contributing to the strategy. Often these would be the organizations that might be applying for grants with Promisezone preference points to carry on their work. But we want to see what their capacity is to play the role that's been laid out for them. So again, the capacity of the lead applicant to keep it all organized, the capacity of the implementation partners to do whatever it is they've signed up to do. We want to see, what the capacity of the team is to use data to track progress and evaluate success, and really manage to progress and spot problems early, figure out how to address those things. We have called out resident engagement capacity as a high priority in any distressed neighborhood revitalization initiative. And that's a type of experience that we want to understand. Number one, again, who does what, who's charged with working with the residents of the Promisezone and keeping them meaningfully involved throughout the term of the work, and what their experience doing that kind of work has been, and having that kind of communication and interface, how they're going to set it up. Should be described in the strategy, and then what they've done in the past and what kind of experience they have should be covered in the capacity section. The strength and extent of the local government commitment is, again, something that can be covered in a letter from your local executive, and it should cover all of the things that government's going to be doing in response to the Promisezone strategy over time. And then the strength and extent of various kinds of partnership commitments from supporting partners that might be providing resources or other kinds of support but aren't doing the day-to-day implementation. And then we're going to want to see a preliminary memorandum of understanding that would be finalized upon selection as a designated community. It does count towards your 35-page additional documentation limit, and it's an important document because often this is where partners say what they really mean and sign on to the roles that are needed to carry out these kinds of strategies. So it's an important part of the application. And again, we don't require that you have letters that repeat what's in the MOU or anything like that. You should not duplicate. There are some optional materials. Again, this letter of intent to apply is something that gets submitted through max.gov. It is non-binding. It is totally optional. It gives us an indication of who's interested. And it gives you an application format that is your application. It sets up your account within that Max survey web function. And then there are some additional documents that are listed there, secondary sources or locally published data on need or anything like that you'd like to submit. Again, we do require the mapping tool. That's what we're going to be using for threshold, but there may be other things that give us context you'd like to supply. Detail on community needs and assets, earlier community plans, stuff like that. That's optional, and letters of support. Again, we are encouraging people to be brief. If you have a really pithy table or an executive summary or something contextual that you think is important, please feel free to submit it under that 35-page limit, but don't give us the whole report. It is something that could, unless the entire thing is where you want to spend that page limit. But we're really hoping that most of the substance of the strategy can be covered in your narrative and your goals and activities template and your MOU. And then the rest of the documentation gives us a little bit more depth and context on that. Application timelines, deadline is November 21st at 5 Eastern. And it must be submitted again through the Max survey. We're listing max.gov on this slide, but again, you really can only get to our portion of that website through the link on www.hud.gov/Promisezones. If you find you really need to submit a different data request, use different data for your eligibility criteria, let us know by October 17th at pzapplications@hud.gov and highlight that that's what it is in the source line, say alternative data source request. That way we can help you solve problems and do it early before there's a crisis at the deadline. Again, resources for applicants. This includes lots of information on federal programs that are contributing to Promise Zones and frequently asked questions, which we're going to be updating after this webinar. And lots of other good stuff that will be helpful to you in the application process. All starts at www.hud.gov/Promisezones. You can sign up for the distribution list if you haven't already at that second web address, hudexchange.info/mailing list, and send us individual emails at promisezones@hud.gov. We're getting tons of email, and we are getting back to everybody as quickly as we can. For congressional staff, we have a dedicated contact in our Congressional Relations Office named Lelaine Bigelow. Lelaine is phenomenally perceptive and responsive and wonderful, and has been an enormous help in this whole process, and is someone who will take care of requests quickly and knows how important they are. Again, upcoming webinars on October 7th for the application survey and the Promise Zone mapping tool. Please sign up on www.hud.gov/Promisezones. You can RSVP for the webinars there. And I think that's it. So I'm going to go back to the upcoming webinar slide and start with some of the questions that folks were kind enough to submit ahead of time. And we're going to have We're going to have a little bit of a process here that I should just note. Some of these questions we will not be able to answer today. Folks have been spending a lot of time technically with the application and have submitted some really good questions that are going to require a little bit of clearance here and consultation with attorneys. So we won't be, I'll let you know which questions those are, and then our process will be that we will post answers and notify not only the person who asked the question, but also everybody on the distribution list when those are up. So we're going to get back to those within 2 weeks. We know a lot of them have to do with, kind of eligibility factors and things that people really need to know quickly to develop their application. So we're going to get back to you as quickly as we can on those. So I'm just going to take the ones on eligibility and selection criteria first. What's the likelihood that a city, and I should have said actually at the top of the hour, but definitely as we start to talk through some of these questions, this is not a call for press purposes. We're off the record from here on out, and it's really for applicants only. So the question is, what is the likelihood that a city like Los Angeles or Philadelphia, which received a Promisezone's designation in the first round, would receive another designation in this round? And the likelihood is, as would be any other application submitted under the selection criteria. We have allowed an additional application from places that, cities that received prior designations and did that with due consideration. So we'll be judging those applications like we do everything else, just by the criteria that are posted. We do require that the city submit some additional information about how they would propose to support 2 applications or 2 Promisezones over the course of the designation term if a second one comes in this round. There's a question about a proposed scenario. One Promisezone application is submitted in the central part of a county with unit of general local government support, and one is submitted in the northern part of a county with city government support. So I'm presuming that the one in the central part of the county is probably submitted with the county's support, and the other one might be submitted with the city's support. Would both applications be accepted and considered? And that is one of those that we're going to need to consider that case and answer the question for all concerned in a few days. But we will get that back out as quickly as possible. How are points awarded in the need section of the application? While it's a 10-point section, are the points awarded relative to the specific constant, in other words, 50% poverty, or are they awarded competitively based on the applicant's highest poverty, crime, and employment? And the answer is the latter. We are actually going to be looking at the indicators that are presented by all of the applicants and able to, rate them according to the overall applicant pool above that 33% threshold of poverty or ELI. The first round Promisezone winners went to the 3 largest urban communities that applied. Is there an advantage or a preference for larger cities in awarding Promisezones? No, there's not. And we are, that's one of the reasons we set up a subcategory for small and medium-sized metro areas. We wanted to make sure that folks knew that, we intend this initiative to be for those types of communities as well. A lot of questions on application content. If a proposed activity is being submitted by a partner organization, should this organization be classified as an implementation partner? If so, will we need an MOU with the organization? I'm not quite sure what folks mean by submitted. If the organization has day-to-day responsibility for something that needs to get carried out as part of the strategy, that would be an implementation partner, and they should sign the MOU. Likewise, if they're providing in-kind support or financial support, they'd be a supporting partner. They would need to be on the MOU for that. So, if there's a more specific question, we can answer it with an email or post it on the FAQs. How extensive should the budget, excuse me, how extensive should the budget be in the goals and activities template? We have asked for committed resources, financial or in kind, and where you feel you have gaps. We said that in a somewhat general way in the knowledge that folks are going to be at different degrees of preparation for different projects they may be mentioning in that template. And so it's a little bit generic. I would encourage you to give us as much detail as you can. And where you have firm commitments, it would be nice to see those echoed elsewhere in the application, like the MOU. But again, we are interested in folks' willingness to display this information publicly, and that also helps some of the non-federal partners understand where there may be opportunities for investment or other kinds of partnership, and so if you allow us to share that information, that may create some opportunities for you. For the template, we indicate that the applicant can identify up to 6 goals, each of which include up to 3 sub-goals. Folks are asking, are the goals in the checkboxes, and are they the description of the Promisezone goal section? Are the goals broad or more narrow? And I think the way we've set it up, the goals are broad. You can define some local goals. For example, in addition to the 5 national Promisezone goals, most of the existing Promisezones have added health and wellness in some way. We know that folks are going to need to do that, so there is some flexibility for you to add things there. And then the sub-goals are more narrow and give you kind of increasing opportunities as you get into the activities that relate to the different sub-goals to get to more and more levels of detail, all of which really helps us understand what kind of projects are contributing to which of your objectives. So I hope that's helpful. We can continue to talk about this in the Q&A if it's useful. Please provide a bit more clarification on the data expectations, particularly the clause about having programs that are already proven to be successful with data, the whole evidence section. So we have recognized that folks have different levels of evidence behind the activities they select to and plan to meet their Promisezone needs. And some types of activities don't have big old research studies behind them, others actually do. And so there's a whole range of different types of evidence or levels of proof that we have seen in the application so far and in other federal conversations with grantees. And so we hope that everyone can find themselves on the spectrum of definitions that are set up in pages 21 and 22 of that application guide. If you have, and we're hoping that folks are going to be looking for things that have a degree of evidence behind them to indicate that that activity or practice might actually work in your community. But we're really kind of looking for why you selected a particular practice for your strategy and what evidence you have behind that. Guidelines suggest that using data points and analysis on information that is no more than 24 months old. Can we discuss how this requirement relates to the use of census data, and is there a preferred data set? So the 24 months piece is actually in the needs assessment, which gets away from the, it's actually in the strategy section, not the needs section, so it's scored separately. And we recognize there's a lot of locally collected data that may give some very important context and depth and dimension to what the census data might say. And so we didn't try to dictate what data set you're using in your needs assessment. We do request that it's relatively recent and you're not just working on something that's like 12 years old, so that we have some sense that it reflects, reality. But beyond that, we in the needs assessment section, that's where you really get to talk about how you are defining your strategy and what you're going to be doing. On the Promisezone asset map, should we identify Hope 6 and neighborhood stabilization program investments? I think That goes with another question about whether federal investments outside the Promise Zone boundary should be identified on the asset map. And I think the key answer there is, number one, we're interested because it helps us make linkages and understand what may be going on among federal investments in your community, and where there may be opportunities for us to synergize a little bit and help you sort of amplify the impact of those things. So we're interested. You also should be including whatever is important to your strategy. So if it's really not important to your strategy, you could leave it off. But I would say generally, it should be on. And we would again, if it's outside the Promise Zone boundary, and it is still important to the strategy, you should give us some context about why that location and that set of activities matters, and it helps us to see it on the map. So there's a cluster of questions about formatting. I'm just going to quickly highlight them, and then we'll probably answer all of these at once so that we can be, very crisp about clarifying some of this stuff. Should there be a separate goals and activity template completed for each sub-goal per goal, or should it all be in one overall goal? Will the goals worksheets count toward the 35-page additional allowance? Regarding the 25-page narrative, does each section have to start on a separate page, and is there a character limit for the required abstract? We will cover all these things shortly in a Q&A document. And we'll try to think through any other lack of clarity or answer any other formatting questions people want to send us on promisezones@hud.gov at that time. So if you are wondering about any of this stuff or have other questions, send them in now. Is leveraging private capital no longer a PZ goal? It's not in the checkboxes. Thank you for looking, whoever that was. We felt like we covered leveraging really effectively by asking folks to tell us about other resources that are involved in the activities that would get listed later in the template. That's why that's not in the checkboxes. Mapping and boundaries. In determining Promise Zone boundaries, can portions of a census tract or block group be eliminated from the designation? I think you'll find in the mapping tool you can draw your own boundary, and you can draw around parts of your community that you don't feel should be in the Promise Zone. So that should work, and you should try it and attend the mapping tool webinar on the 7th. When deciding upon a boundary for Promise Zones, does the entire area have to be determined to be 30 to 100% poverty as determined by the mapping tool on the Promise Zone website? Are there areas that are not 33% or more allowed to be included as long as the overall poverty rate for the entire area is 33 or above? And if so, could you explain how the averaging process can be calculated? So the mapping tool does the averages for you. That's one of the reasons we developed it. The overall poverty rate needs to be 33% or higher. There can be areas that are lower as long as the overall area is higher. And I believe that 30 to 100% is in there as just sort of a guide as people are drawing their boundaries. But again, that mapping tool does the averaging and spits out the relevant data for you. Much more detail with real experts on the mapping tool on October 7th in that webinar. Can you please clarify the relationship or distinction between the Promise Zone boundaries and partners? Specifically, we've drawn our map and determined our zone. It includes a couple of schools, and then the questioner goes on to say, we think that, obviously some of the Promise Zone kids may go to some of these schools that are outside the zone, and there may be some benefits flowing to Promise Zone residents in other places. This is one where we will clarify for you. We've actually been working through that question in sort of program by program as the existing zones apply for grants, and we have some guidance we can put up on that. So we'll get that back out and posted shortly. After using the Promise Zone mapping tool, the city discovered that its preferred Promise Zone boundary yields a poverty rate of 32.99%. Will you round? This is one that I would like folks to weigh in on internally as a program matter, but we will get back to you shortly since I know it's important for communities to be able to plan. When identifying the area of the promise zone, are we using several census tracts? Our understanding is the average of poverty or extremely low income rate must be at or above, as opposed to each tract being at 33. Again, it's the average overall. And encourage this questioner to come to the mapping tool seminar. On max.gov, where can you find the PDF of all the questions in the application on max.gov? I'm not sure we have a PDF like that, actually. But you should definitely attend the max.gov Max Survey webinar on October 7th, and your questions will be answered there. We didn't receive an email after completing the survey. How can we ensure it was successfully submitted? We still cannot access the application. I am not an expert, but it sounds like that did not get successfully submitted. So this is, again, a situation where someone should really sit in and just walk it through on October 7th on that webinar, and hopefully we can clear that up for you. Benefits from designees. Someone's asking about the skill set of the AmeriCorps Vista volunteers, and if we are selected, do we have input on who will be sent? Absolutely you do. The sponsoring organization works closely with the Corporation for National and Community Service. Their state directors have been marvelous working with organizations that are creating opportunities for vistas. And so part of what you do is you write an assignment and a scope of work, not using the right AmeriCorps terms for that, but with consultation from the AmeriCorps Vista program, and then they post it nationally. You can do some recruiting locally to find folks that you think would be appropriate for your community. You also are involved in the selection of the AmeriCorps Vista volunteers. They're members that work with you. So more information on the AmeriCorps Vista program is available in the federal partners program links on our HUD.gov/Promisezones website. And that, if you keep going through that, you end up on the AmeriCorps Vista website as well for as much information as you can use. And it's truly a wonderful program. A couple of additional questions came in regarding the Promisezones application. Can a 501c4 nonprofit organization apply? We've said you need to be under 501c of the federal code, and we will follow up with our attorneys to get you a definitive parameters around 501c4s. So stay tuned quickly for that. And then can an organization that is in a city that already has a promise zone still be considered for this round? Yes, according to the selections the selection criteria that have been laid out. So I think I'm a little bit over time. We did get a couple of questions in at the very last. One about state-supported universities being lead applicants. Again, we will try to get back to that question. Would a university be considered a unit of general local government? That's an interesting legal question. I kind of don't think so by the definition that we have available in the application guide, but we will run that down with the attorneys and post a definitive answer. So want to just make sure that everybody is looking hard at the www.hud.gov/Promisezones website and all of the information that's up there now. If you don't see the information that you need, or you need a more specific answer, ask us at promisezones@hud.gov. And we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Again, we are going to post additional sort of updated FAQs as a result of this webinar and the ones that we did for rural and tribal applicants earlier in the week, and get that up as quickly as we can to address the specific questions that were raised today. And we'll let everybody know who's signed up for the distribution list and the RSVP for this webinar when those FAQs are up. And I think that's it. Question about if they're going to let me keep talking? I'm going to say that we have a question from community and technical colleges. Can they apply as a lead as long as they're partnered with local government? Community colleges can apply as long as they are partnered with local government, supported by by local government. And then there's a question about whether and/or, a public housing authority, if that's the partner for the community college, the public housing authority is the partner, can that qualify? And the answer is it has to be local government. So the public housing authority could also be the lead applicant in partnership with local government. Can one application come in with a local educational agency as the lead and 3 units of general local government? I think this is one where it would be helpful for us to have more context on the specific case. There would be no bar to having more units of general local government, but we need to make sure that the one that in which the Promisezone is located is involved. But I think a little more context from that questioner would be helpful. Does an applicant get higher points for having higher than the threshold poverty rate, or is that just the threshold? The threshold poverty rate is an eligibility criterion, and then there is a need section that gives you additional points the higher the factors of need that are described in the application. If your target community is already designated as a choice neighborhood that is currently completing its transformation plan, would it be eligible for a Promisezone designation as well? The answer to that is that the target community would need to meet the qualifying criteria for the Promisezone initiative and have the support of, and have an eligible lead organization with the support of its local government. Also has to have population between 10,000 and 200,000. So if it meets all those qualifying criteria, it's eligible. And I think that we have exhausted the current questions. And I just want to thank everyone for staying on the line for a few extra minutes to try to respond to all of the really fabulous questions people sent in. I hope that we're getting a bit more detail on several of those questions, and for the ones that we couldn't answer today, we will get right back to you on the answers to those as well. So thanks to everyone for attending, and thank you for considering applying for Promisezones. Take care.